Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural AI and in Work and Skills Forum. My name is Isa. I'm the founder of Careers Camp. And as someone who's been involved in the world of skills for about nearly a decade, I've seen sort of various shifts in AI and various shifts in skilling and upskilling. And everything seemed to be going at a pace where um, people have seen change in very small drips and drabs, whether it be a bit of technological change, whether it be through e-learning, etc. But then AI came, and AI changed a lot for a lot of people. And what we saw change from recruitment, from medical to advertising to media. AI has changed a lot, but at the core of it, and something which I'm seeing, is the change in work and in skills. So what does that mean for me? What does that mean for everybody else? And that's something that we're going to try and establish or try and get an insight into today. Before we begin, I just want to thank a lot of you who have joined today. Because more importantly, without you, obviously, this audience, we won't share the message that we're trying to share today. I noticed from some of the attendees, from some of the streaming websites we're using to stream this, be it due to spread this event. We've noticed some people have tuned in from Australia, from South Africa, and I think we've got one person from the west coast of America. So that's a bit of an interesting mix in people. Joining me today, we've got Louise, who's commercial director for BPP, and we've got Tony Pitchford, who's the account director for BCS. Welcome to you both. Louise, Tony, I wanted to begin with a bit of an easy question. Firstly, a quick insight and intro into you and your sort of respective organisations, and then what was your first experiences with AI? Let's go Louise first.
Yeah, thank you, Isa. So I'm Louise Ball. As Isa said, I'm the Commercial Director for BPP School of Technology. So BPP are a training provider. We've been around for 45 years. Our background in terms of when we were first established, we were set up initially to put accountants through their accountancy, so their professional qualifications, and then we've grown and evolved. But this was actually responsive to our clients because roles are changing, organisations are changing, because technology is always advancing. And, you know, there was a prediction from PwC that said within the next decade, 60% of the jobs that we do today will not exist anymore. So as a training provider, we've responded to that, and we've worked with industry and we've worked with our clients to develop these programs. In terms of, you know, my first experience with AI, I mean, it's always been around in terms of, you know, if we think about things like predictive text, but from a personal experience, I actually did an MSc in applied data analytics, which I finished last September. So I've developed neural networks. I developed a recommendation model. So yeah, I think it's very exciting. So yeah, thanks for the question, Isa.
And over to you, Tony.
Yeah, morning everybody. My name's Tony Pitchford. I'm an account director here at BCS. If you've come across BCS before, you probably know that we're a membership body and we represent those people who work in the tech sector. And our overarching mission is to make IT good for society. So we represent over 70,000 members in 150 different countries around the world. And we encourage a diverse range of people into tech. We advocate ethical uses and practices and standards. We work through our learning and development arm to address the digital skills gap, but ultimately by becoming a trusted partner for employers, providers, and our members, that kind of headline goal is always underpinning everything that we do, which is to make IT good for society. So that's BCS as an organisation. Yeah, much like I think everybody else, I probably came across AI without really knowing about it in terms of, you know, predictive text and, Last.fm and Spotify playlists and Amazon recommendations in the background. But most recently, like everybody else, I've been playing a lot with ChatGPT and working very closely with our policy team and with training providers like BPP to develop a sensible, practical approach and a set of guidelines around using artificial intelligence in the learning and development and assessment and examination space. So, kind of heavily involved in some of the work that we're doing here at BCS at the moment on that.
And Tony, since you're on a bit of a role there, what's your can you shed some light in terms of how AI is expected to sort of shape the future job market?
Yeah, you're not giving me the little questions that I say. No. I think that look, there's an awful lot of concern in a lot of articles around AI at the moment about the threats to jobs. If we wind back, 400 or 500 years to the invention of seed drills, people were worried about jobs being lost in agriculture. The looms threatened the kind of factory workers in the 18th century, and then steam engines and diesel engines, automation and robots and computers. They've always been headlined with this is a threat to jobs. I think we need to be very careful about kind of over-egging that kind of message of fear. This is about innovation. And with any innovation, there will be winners and losers. And our role as BCS is to make sure that there are as few losers as possible in all of this. It's those people that can adapt to the use of AI in the workplace, no matter what their role. So I think ChatGPT has been a great example of something that can generate content incredibly quickly. Now, straight away, the world of copywriters and content creators and marketers, and it was something that was kind of a headline of these jobs are under threat. The reality is that using AI as a baseline to help create that content and then finessing it into your customer voice or finessing it into different audiences, all of those are going to take a human skill right now. And AI will only do what it's told. Someone needs to tell it what to do. So it's about adapting AI into the workplace as opposed to replacing jobs. So those people that are willing to adapt to it will be successful in the workplace in the future.
A very, very interesting point there. I think, Louise, then definitely come to you. You must have seen industries who have been impacted by AI and also the rise of AI in the last couple of months.
Yeah.
What interesting industries have you seen or what industries do you think would have the more significant changes to it when AI comes in the coming years?
So it's the overall impact of AI on the job market. It's complex, it's multifaceted. I think, there will be positive and negative effects, but I think one of the things that I'm seeing is the need for trained computer programmers, data scientists, software engineers, and the whole IT ecosystem around AI. This is only going to grow. So, I think, yes, there will be job displacement in some industries, but that will also create new opportunities in fields such as data science and machine learning and software engineer. Something that I've seen come up most recently is this rise for the demand for prompt engineers. So these are organisations that want to leverage the opportunity from ChatGPT. So actually it's about we need to bring in engineers who are actually skilled at asking the right questions. So it'll be really, really interesting. AI, it's an enabler, it's not a threat. So I'm really interested to see how this is going to impact and enhance our day-to-day lives and the jobs. And Tony gave a really good example there of agriculture. So I always think about manufacturing because during the last 100 years we've seen that we've automated a lot of the jobs in manufacturing. So robots, machines, electric motors. They've created AI that has replaced the human muscle. So if your job was to screw in a bolt or do other repetitive work, that job does not exist now. It's been automated. But manufacturing industry is still short of people. They still can't find the people. So what happened was those jobs became better jobs. They became more skilled, higher paid, mentally more interesting jobs. So the people who previously were screwing in those bolts, they've learned to do other things, new things. And I think, the size of the manufacturing economy, it got smaller in terms of people. But a lot of the jobs that went away, they weren't very healthy or safe in the first place. So, I guess, we've got to look at that in terms of AI, because what that's actually doing is it's freeing up knowledge workers. So what those robots did for the human muscle, things like tools like ChatGPT, are doing that for the mind. So, it will provide an opportunity. But I think, there's a really, really famous quote out there, which is, don't be afraid of the AI, be afraid of, AI is not going to take your jobs. It's the people who know how to use AI. So these people that sit in the intersection between the business and the technology, they're the ones that are going to take your jobs.
And Louise, on that, well, what would you consider them? You touched on a few of them just now, but what would you consider the most sort of must-have AI-related skills that sort of professions in today's workforce should be engaging with, whether, but also HR leaders? What should they be working with their workforces on to enhance the AI capabilities of their workforce?
Yeah, so I think, you know, in terms of skills, there's a report that's come out from the World Economic Forum that has actually named what the most essential skills are between now and 2027. And in terms of the top four, within those top four, you've got lifelong learning and you've got data analytics. So they're key. Learning has to be part of our jobs. Okay, learning is how we as individuals we deliver better outcomes, and it should be a core part of everybody's role. So roles are changing, and that's not just HR, but it's across the board, and the skills to do those roles are changing. So it's important that we maintain the skills that are relevant to do the role. So invest in your own knowledge. So again, it goes back to that being a lifelong learner. I've mentioned there's this rising demand for prompt engineers, but today's professionals, they need an awareness and also an understanding of the limitations of AI. So I think, ChatGPT, Tony mentioned he's played around with it. It's really easy to use, but a lot of people feel threatened. But it's as simple as just, for example, using Facebook. So I do think it will become part of the way that we work. But I think in terms of, today's professionals, they definitely need an awareness of what it can do. And I think the other thing is understand what you are asking. But when I say understand the limitations, it's been trained on human data. So, you've got to have an understanding if the output is wrong or misguided or it contains bias.
Tony, on that point there, what would you say, how can professionals with sort of no prior knowledge of AI get started, and what resources or pathways would you recommend?
Yeah, I think Isa, just to kind of echo what Louisa said there, we're looking at a kind of 4-point plan for applying AI into L&D, and I think it's been beautifully summarised by Louise there. But it's kind of competency, which is knowledge and skills in the first instance. I know the DFE strongly recommends a knowledge-rich curriculum, but we think it goes beyond that into actually applying that knowledge in the workplace as a competency. Curiosity, which is about making the connections, because that's something that AI isn't quite making at the moment. It's that leap of imagination between one idea in one sphere of knowledge and taking that and applying it elsewhere. That's a very human skill. But that curiosity is also about, where can we, what questions can we ask, and the prompt engineering side of things that Louise mentioned there. Beyond that is validation, and looking at the intent of the work that you're doing and the intent of the AI system itself, and the limitations, again, of where the data sits. And then the fourth and final piece is the human. It is overlaying ethical, professional, inclusive behaviour into your approach towards AI. So there are lots of core technical skills and training, BPP and others will be able to deliver in terms of getting people skilled up as data technicians, data analysts, data scientists, and there are lots of programs out there. From a BCS point of view, we've introduced an AI pathway, which is for those people working in an environment where AI is being applied, and that covers everything from ethical governance to put it, your strategy as an organization, implementation, what is machine learning, data visualization, all of those kind of big things that the people who perhaps are not directly involved in the heavy lifting on the technical side are aware of, but need to know and need to be aware of. So it comes back to that curiosity and the learning, the lifelong learning side of things. Those are now, they've always been essential skills, but I think the pace that this is running at now just means that we can't afford to take our foot off the gas at all. In that it's a constant learning environment now in the workplace.
And Louise, I think it's a good point to you mentioned Louise there. Louise, you have recently partnered with Grant Thornton, haven't you, on the skilling piece, haven't you?
Yes. So I just want to kind of say something on the back of what Tony said there, because people hear AI, they hear things like machine learning, neural networks. It becomes very scary. But actually, a lot of the problems that we can solve can be done in Microsoft Excel or these low-code, no-code tools. So BPP, we've partnered with Grant Thornton, who are a really reputable professional service firm. They're global, and they go out and they support organisations. So they go out and they advise on things like digital transformation and people. And so they're working directly with organisations, and they partnered with us because what they have done is they've fed into our content, so that we're not just an academic establishment that are teaching tools and techniques in isolation. But actually it's got this commercial lens. So actually, how does this resonate? What challenges are people trying to solve with their data? So one of the things that we started to do now is contextualize that to specific roles. So back to the first point, which is AI can seem very scary, intimidating, but not everybody needs to be a data scientist or a Python coder. So let's make it accessible in terms of teaching people to use the tools and techniques, but actually within the context of their role. So what we've done as part of this partnership is we've created this HR analytics program. So we think about the role of HR. It's very data rich. We've got churn models. So you think about how expensive it is to recruit people, attract people. People are leaving. Why are they leaving? There is so much data. There's demographic data. So actually, let's teach the tools and techniques, things like Power BI or Microsoft Excel data analytics tool pack. So we're staying away from those statistical programming languages, but actually, but we're teaching it within the context of somebody who works in HR that actually is probably spending the majority of their time with the head either in an MI system or an Excel spreadsheet, and actually they're a knowledge worker. So let's free them up, let's automate what they're doing. We can save them weeks and weeks of work. And enable them to do the things that can't be, done by a computer. So, let's work on more creative things. And think about the type of person who goes into HR. They do that because they care about people. They want to work with people. They don't want to spend all the time, kind of cleansing data, pulling reports down, having to check it, fill things in manually. That can be automated. So that's how that partnership come together. And we've worked with their clients, so they've fed into that. They've looked at the content that we've created. We had Estee Lauder work with us, so it's been really exciting to be able to do that, and something that when we're speaking to HR professionals, this is just such a big opportunity for them. It's going to save them so much time and make life so much easier for them.
And you mentioned an employer there. Have you had any employers who you worked with or who have had any hesitation around AI and embracing AI? How did you kind of overcome some of the thoughts that they may have had?
Yeah, it's so one of the big banks that I work with. So I work with TSB, and the my client that I work with will not mind me talking about this because he talks about it all the time. But the first thing that he had to do was win the hearts and minds of people. So you think about the retail banking model. It's changing, isn't it? The branches are closing down. A lot of the tasks are automated. Financial services businesses need to be technology businesses. So the way that they're responding to this is part of their ESG agenda, how we're responding to mega trends like AI and automation. We're reskilling people, we're investing in people. So, I think win the hearts and minds. We've created some short courses for them, which we're putting people through. That gets over the fear barrier. People see the opportunity, which is I can actually change career here. So I don't need to leave the bank. I've worked here a long time. I know the bank. I understand financial services, which is half the battle. But actually now I've got this real opportunity to pivot and the company is supporting them to do this. So we do short courses to get them interested, to get them over the fear factor, and then we take them into apprenticeship programs which are funded. And I'm seeing more and more of financial services businesses in particular doing this, which is actually sponsoring career change programs. So I've never seen this before in all the time I've worked in the industry, so it's really rewarding. It's actually quite interesting.
There is, and you're right, you touched on it, there is, as Tony touched on as well, there's an acceleration of pace in terms of
Yeah.
the learning that needs to be had within companies, but also there's rightly going to be concerns within companies about how they embrace AI.
Yeah.
Importantly, I think is ethics, and the very first version of AI that came out some years ago, where it was using artificial intelligence for recruitment, and it noticed biases within
Yeah.
the system.
Yeah.
I mean, can you? I'll start with Tony here, and can you highlight any of the key ethical considerations around around AI, ethically related, and how AI can actually be a positive or a kind of way in which addressing these barriers that may be present?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I suppose the first thing to point out, and the state the blindingly obvious, but ethics is hard. It can be it can be quite difficult. But there are some really positive examples of where AI can make an impact ethically in organisations and in industries. So a great example is in the medical field, for example. We're applying AI image recognition technology to be able to reduce the time it takes to identify certain types of cancer at a speed and a rate and a consistency that a human being simply can't match. It still requires the human to overlay that, because from an ethical point of view, would you really want your diagnosis driven purely by machine learning? You would not. And so there is an ethical approach that is required there. I think with any organisation looking at implementing AI or already working in AI needs to take a step back and just have a look at, where does the AI sit? Does it have a high degree of responsibility within the decision making in that particular process? Does it have a low responsibility? And have a discussion around where that, does that decision have an impact internally, externally? Is there an ethical impact around those decisions made that can be automated? There's some interesting points here around ownership as well. There's a really interesting case going on which was make the headlines, and you're probably aware of, around the Horizon IT system in the post office. A system that was developed by Fujitsu, created under the Horizon brand, managed by the post office, but which ultimately kind of had an impact on postmasters in the UK that were sent to prison, some of them, because of issues around the software. Now, from an ethical point of view, there's a really interesting debate going on around the ownership of that software, whether it sits within the Horizon Group, whether it was Fujitsu as the developers, or Royal Mail and Post Office who actually owned the system. So there's some really interesting pieces there about ownership. Who ultimately has responsibility for it? Is it the developer, the individual developer working on that system? Is it the team? Is it the organisation building it? Is it the ultimate end user? And so ownership is a really kind of key piece to consider there. And policies. We ran what we call a digital skills network, kind of regional events where we bring educators, employers, charities, local decision makers, policy makers together and debate certain topics. And in our last digital skills network in Reading, we looked at and discussed AI in one of the panels. And I asked the question of the audience, how many of the organisations represented there actually had a clear policy or guidelines from their own organisation about the use of systems like ChatGPT in the workplace? And out of 130, 140 people in the audience, about 10% of people put their hands up. And how many people were developing policies or were aware of policies being developed? Even less. So it starts at the top. In order to implement good ethical usage of AI, that has to be driven from the top down. It has to be driven by the right questions being asked and filtered all the way down to those people who are building the systems, who are training the systems, who are implementing systems? Do you know where this system has come from? Do you know what data it's been trained of? Do you know what kind of inherent bias it may or may not have? What is the risk? What is the explainability of that? Is that a word? I'm going to use it. Explainability is now a word. All the way down to environmental impact. This is something that I think is not talked about enough. In order to run a system like ChatGPT, there's huge amounts of CO2 being produced, and huge amounts of heat being generated by these systems, and we need to have a look at that across the piece. So a lot. It does filter down, from the top. Starts with good policies, guidelines, and guidance, and then all the way down to the kind of the training and development that goes into those end users, so that they know how to use these systems responsibly, professionally, ethically, and in an inclusive manner. And that's really what we're after.
That's brilliant, that is. And Louise, I've got a few
Yeah.
minutes. You want to add anything to that? But by the way, if anybody's got any questions, please do and ask them in the chat box. There should be a little button for the chat box function.
Yeah.
So please do ask any questions there.
Yeah.
Louise.
So I think it's interesting that Tony's mentioned policy there, because I think the technology is fast, it advances quickly, it's always here and it's always moving. But policy is slow, isn't it? So you think about an organisation, a large corporate, it can be like trying to turn an oil tanker. And then with government, it's even slower. So, it's no surprise that it is a struggle for organisations to catch up. We know AI has so much potential, but at the end of the day, we've got machines that are making decisions for us. So we're allowing them autonomy in making decisions, and we gave them that responsibility, and then we trust those decisions. So the problem is with that is machines are not capable of responding to morally relevant features. So they're unable to self-reflect. They don't have moral emotion. So they are trained on data that we fed them. So Issa, you mentioned at the start in terms of that bias in recruitment. So, if there's variables in a demographic, so race and gender, we make a decision and we think that making decisions based on race and gender, that's inadmissible. So, what the problem is if it's been trained on a Western data set, those attributes are going to be statistically correlated. So there's a moral mistake there, right? And I think, the thing is we're feeding this data to the machines. They're predicting accurately, but again, morally, it's not correct. So I think, we've got to remember that if an AI model has been trained on human public data, that it's not going to reflect everything. Now, what we can do is we can train the model, so we can build ethics in and put prohibitions on the model. So you can say, don't use this data, don't use race or gender to make a decision. So say it's a loan application, but there could be a hidden variable. So I'll circle back to the recruitment, because that was a really good example, which was it was an IBM recruitment model, and it was pointed at their existing workforce. So it was basically saying, these are the people within our business, so recruit for people with these attributes. And they removed gender from that, but because 95% of the people that work there are male, there was a hidden attribute in that data, because it was looking at the hobbies, and it was basically hobbies that are typically associated with men: golf, football, etc. No offence to any female footballers or golfers out there, but that was what was coming out of the data. So I think this is the thing, is we've got to be aware of, what data it's been trained on, and, and having a look at the results. Is the bias in the data set? I think, I work for an education provider, I work for a university. There's lots of debate at the moment around cheating, okay? Using ChatGPT, is this cheating? But you've got to think it could save hours and hours of work. Think about lawyers having to spend hours and hours reviewing documents. You could point ChatGPT at your corpus and it can save hours and hours of work. So it is interesting, but I think this will change. It's multifaceted. And if we think about the likes of social media, nobody knew the impact that would have. We all were concerned originally around productivity. It was going to impact productivity, but actually now the main concern is privacy. So, it's all up for debate, and it is changing all the time.
Yeah, that's
Can I just add to that as well?
yeah, go for it.
One of these, one of the points that's coming out more and more, particularly around these large language models like Bard and ChatGPT, is around the. I won't use the phrase that I think Deloitte used in there, but it comes out with some rubbish. I think was the summary. AI hallucinates, and it also feeds on itself. So there are examples that Harvard Business School found where ChatGPT was creating its own fake academic references. Because it didn't know the answer, but it knew that 95% of what it was producing had an academic reference, and so it created its own academic reference that didn't exist. So it is hallucinating. And then, unfortunately, what happens is if you kind of press the little button that gives it a thumbs up and says that's a good answer and I'm really, really pleased with that, it starts to train itself on that as a positive reinforced action. So it starts to feed off its own errors and then starts referencing its own hallucinated references. This is a really dangerous scenario. So again, it goes back to that human and the validation that Louise talked about earlier on. From an ethical point of view, there is an impact that could potentially happen. If bias starts to creep in, if it's backed up by hallucinated facts or references, it looks like it could be credible. It is the responsibility of somebody somewhere to be able to check that before it goes out to wider society. And I think that's where ethical, responsible, professional behaviour from the developers, from the users, and from those people who implement these systems is absolutely critical.
I feel as though we've barely even scratched the surface of the breadth and depth of this. Thank you very much for that, Louise and Tony. So questions, if anybody's got questions, please put them into the chat box. I'll read them out. We have one question from Alison. Alison, no company name to mention, but Alison asks, there's a cost attached to this. How do we mitigate some of the major costs attached to ensure that we can get effective use of AI? Who wants to go for that? Louise, go for it.
So in terms of a financial cost, I'm not quite sure. I don't know if Alison can just clarify the question. Do we mean in terms of a cost?
So in terms of embedding what seems like it's embracing AI within the organisation comes at a cost, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, yes, there's a cost, but it increases productivity. So really good example of this is a colleague of mine was spending an entire day creating his reports, and that took a day, and he did the same program as I did. Within a few weeks of being on the program, he'd automated all of that. He'd set up a little bot, so what took an entire day took 30 seconds. That's 390 business hours that you've saved. 15 people in that department all do the same thing. So if you think about your day-to-day role, if you are doing something that is repetitive and it's the same thing, we can automate it so that it will provide opportunities. It will 100% make an organisation more productive. And I think it goes back to the number one skill, which is being a lifelong learner. We have to invest in ourselves. I think something that came out in terms of UK government's campaign, which is their ambition to make UK a technology superpower. And the thing is there needs to be this significant investment into upskilling, because we're massively underdeveloped. UK is ranked 42nd globally, and even in data science, where we're the strongest, we still only rank 28. So we're falling behind. We're falling behind other countries. So we need to upskill. And I think I've seen organisations that make this commitment. We're a learning organisation. They give people the time. There's funding that's there available. There's funding from the DFE, there's the apprenticeship levy, there's organisations not spending the levy who are actually they are gifting that to smaller organisations. So there is funding available. I think the number one challenge when I speak to people who work in HR, L&D, and this came from a CIPD event I attended, which is number one challenge is time from the business, because we're fighting fires, business as usual, but there has to be investment. But I will say, and I know this from my own experience, the investment is worth it, because knowledge is, it's transformational. A tiny bit of knowledge can change your life. So yeah, I think that there has to be investment, but there are funds available to do it. It's just about the time.
Brilliant, brilliant. Claire asks, really interesting points. Really interesting points from Louise on possibility of AI being trained within for existing data sets, bias data sets. My thing keeps scrolling up and down. Very relevant to. I don't know if you can you see that question in particular that's come through.
I can't see the question.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
It says, no, it's fine. It's fine. It just keeps scrolling up and down. But to build new data sets, to build data sets, transparency into service level agreements for automated recruitment platforms. So possible new job role for businesses is to build data sets for transparency into service level agreements for automated recruitment platforms. What's happening? Every time I scroll up, it scrolls back down.
It scrolls back down.
Yeah, there's a few other points. This is you spoke about lifelong learning. Do you think an accredited understanding of or introduction to AI course should be developed for an awarding organisation if nothing exists already? I know Tony's gonna jump on this very fast.
And what do you think? If you should say that, as I represent an awarding organisation, yes.
What do you think it should? What do you think it should contain within for a complete beginner? And then our last question on this from Mark as well, which is hi, thanks. What are the key topics to cover for AI MI for non-experts, i.e. leaders and managers? You mentioned ethics, inclusion, bias. What else? And then good discussion. I would say I'll give you a few minutes to answer these questions, because then I do want to end at 9:45. Let's go with Tony there.
Yeah, sure. Well, look, I agree. I think you can go on training courses that don't produce certificates and they have value, if you come out with a skill that's appropriate. But as a professional body and as an awarding body, we're working, our policy team is working very, very hard at the moment to encourage the UK to consider the professionalisation of the tech sector. So for data scientists, for people who are developing these systems at their core, to join the Data Foundation, which is kind of a group that we're involved in with several other organisations, the Royal Society, the Royal Statistical Society, BCS, and a number of other organisations have come together as part of the Data Foundation. But we also offer professional qualifications for, as I mentioned earlier on, for non-technical managers and leaders who want to understand more about the implications of this technology. So it is around, well, what is machine learning? What is data visualization? What are the ethical implications around applying artificial intelligence within the organization? And those are available as kind of a standalone awards, or you can build up credits through it by taking a number of exams towards a full pathway, towards a professional diploma. So there are routes out there. And BCS isn't the only organisation offering kind of accredited training. I think a lot of other accreditation is very much about the heavy lifting, on the technical side and how to do it. This is about how this works in practice and the standards that sit around that. So, some of the courses that we offer will talk about how this impacts against ISO standards, for example, or GDPR rules and regulations, as well as the kind of the governance that is required around this kind of the governance and management around the system. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is around what we're doing to address the skills gap at source. So we have robotics courses that are going in at primary school level, and the courses that are run at secondary school level. We're doing an awful lot through our BCS charity, the charitable side of BCS, through our BEV computing in primary school and computing at school at secondary schools in the UK. So there are lots of projects there to encourage more and more people to consider tech as a career. And you may have seen some of the headlines over the last few days that for the second or third year running, we've had an increase in the uptake in computing degrees through UCAS this year. We're also seeing a kind of steady increase in the number of women that are taking IT as a degree option as well, which is really positive news after, well, Louise and I have worked together for a long time now, and it's been pretty much stuck at, what, 17, 18% for since we first met, kind of 17, 18 years ago. It's been horrible. But it's starting, the needle is starting to shift on that. I think more and more people are seeing tech as a viable career option from a diverse set of diverse backgrounds, and that's something that BCS is really working hard to deliver.
Brilliant. Louise, do you want to add one or two points on that?
I mean, I think, I work for a university, so we do degrees and master's degrees, but sometimes it's not just like an apprenticeship. Minimum length of stay is going to be 15 months. That's a long time. So sometimes, committing to that is like trying to use a sledgehammer to crack a walnut. Sometimes it's just about people having an awareness. And we've developed programs that raises awareness. What that does is it improves the quality of your data, because that's the one of the biggest challenge in terms of introducing automation. It's about your data doesn't have that integrity. So we give everybody this awareness. Everybody understands the opportunity, the challenges. They're not afraid. They're not intimidated. They're able to use the tools. And then we also do courses for, like, short courses that are not apprenticeships for strategic leaders. So these are the individuals who they don't need to work with the data, but they need to understand the opportunity. They need to understand the competitive landscape, and also they need to be able to make decisions that are based on the data. So what is the data telling them? We can interpret the distribution of the data. So I think there are so many opportunities out there, and funding as well. DFE have funded these digital boot camps. It will enable people to career change. Tony mentioned diversity. I think as we've said, we've both been in the sector a long time, and it's not working. Whatever corporations, organisations are doing, it's not working because nothing's changed, and we can't continue to do the same thing and expect a different result. So actually, I think what I'm seeing is these career change opportunities, the funds that's being brought in by government, that is definitely going to give an opportunity, because it's enabling people to pivot in their career where they are. So yeah, I think hopefully that's
interesting
helpful.
across the board. I'm seeing he's bringing in a lot more diversity into the tech sector than a lot of the initiatives that we've seen over the last 20 years have produced. Yeah,
that's fascinating. Thank you very much for that. And it's a very insightful conversation. I think it's a very good point to put a pause on this conversation, because I do want to continue this conversation at some point as well. And that's it. As I said, I want to try and keep on time with this conversation. What I will say is that I would like to hold an AI in work and skills forum in person, probably later this year or probably early next year. So if anybody wants to be involved, if anybody wants to host it, if anybody wants to take part, please message me, because it's such an important conversation. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of there's a lot of questions, and there's a lot of questions still not asked. I remember when we were talking about diversity, when I was doing diversity-related conversations a couple of years ago. It's a topic that's got so much to it, and similarly here with this conversation. But until then, thank you all for attending, and hopefully, fingers crossed, see you all at a in-person AI in Work and Skills Forum. Thank you very much.